since this is, after all, Oxford Medieval Studies, we thought we'd get out a manuscript that is actually owned in Oxford. And so if you're here over COVID, if you went to go and get your COVID vaccination at Cassim Stadium, you're actually going to the site of Littlemore Priory, which is a community of Benedictine nuns in the Middle Ages. And this manuscript is actually this is actually owned by the nuns at Littlemore. And so it's considered to be probably one of the first manuscripts that was probably made in Oxford, and it's an illustrated copy of Anselm's Meditations. It's probably based on the series of illustrations are really interesting. They're probably based on a continental source. And if you look at the page on the left here, just for fun, this is a early depiction of Santa Claus, or of course Saint Nicholas. And this book, like I said, all three of these books illustrate different aspects of things we do at the Bodleian. And this book was actually bound by Nicole Gilroy. Would you like to say a bit about that, Nicole?
I can, yeah. So I can't remember. I'll have to look at the report to see when it was done. But this was rebound in response to, there was an Anselm study day some years ago. Let's see. I can't tell you exactly the year, but anyway, there was an Anselm study day, and a few manuscripts which were in poor condition were noticed. And this and another one, the people working on the text raised money to pay for the manuscripts to be conserved. And the question about this one, the binding, which you can see, the old binding, you can see bits of it. So there's some of the pieces that were taken off. This was a 17th century binding, and it had fallen to pieces. We always keep all the bits we take off, so here are the bits we took off. But it had fallen apart, and it was not really repairable in its current state. But there were also some questions that were raised because it was falling to pieces, and some of the questions that you can sometimes answer when a book is very badly damaged. And one of the questions about this was that it contains 3 texts, I believe. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. 3 separate texts. And the question was, were the texts together when it went to Littlemore, or were they bound together prior to its life in Littlemore, or were they brought together while it was there? And so I was asked to look at evidence of previous bindings and sewing holes and so on. And to cut a very long story short, we couldn't find evidence of more than one previous binding of them all together. So the suggestion was that it was bound probably at Littlemore together for the first time. And that's interesting for lots of reasons, but to me it was particularly interesting because the binding that it was bound in at Littlemore appears to be, I'm looking at Kat, our new intern, who is a recently graduated textile conservation student. The binding it was bound together in previously appears to have been a textile binding. So you can see evidence, some of you can see evidence here of a decorative textile binding, and the turn-ins which have sort of offset, and little bits of it have got stuck to what was previously the first flyleaf. What you can't see, because it's deep in the gutter, but there are lots of photos of it, which if you were to call up this manuscript, or if you were to just call up the report of it in Bodley Refs, you would be able to see the reference to it. The end bands, so here you can see these end bands I sewed. They're a structural part of the book to control the opening and help board attachment. But the previous end bands were coloured, and in those colours of that textile binding, so that sort of purpley maroon colour and green and blue. And this little broken threads of those end bands are still present in the gutter, and I left them all there. So I think that's all I can say about it. Yeah, apart from that, it's a beautiful book, and it was an absolute pleasure to work on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to use now. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting example of the constant tension that we're dealing with within the library. Of, are these books part of a working library, or are they just artifacts to be stored underground? And it's, I think our absolute wizards in conservation somehow managed to make us pull off both today with much better conservation practices that really developed over just, I mean, in many ways the last 30 years, right?
So the department was sort of founded in the late 70s, early 80s. There was a bindery prior to that, but the bindery prior to the sort of 70s, 80s was rebinding things, but perhaps without the kind of archaeological intent that we do it now. So it was really set up by Chris Clarkson, who I'm sure lots of you have heard of, in the early 80s.
Yes. Yes, and I think that these stands are also inventions of
Oh, it does, yeah. He, along with David Cooper, designed these foam wedge system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, so the conservation is an absolute key part of the Bodleian today. This facsimile is another aspect of what we do. So this is a facsimile of the Ashmole bestiary. This is one of our most precious manuscripts. Normally, it is kept in an underground vault. You have to ask permission. You have to have a really, really good reason to see this manuscript, and so that means that it's stored away for it should last for another 7 centuries. But the problem is making this material accessible. And so this one of the things we can do is work with external publishers to create facsimiles of these manuscripts. And so this is an example of a facsimile that was done in 1983, actually, but we continue to make new ones. If that means you can leaf through it, as Henrik is currently doing, and you can get a sense. Unlike with digital manuscripts are great, but with this you can get a sense of the scale of it. You can just sit down and read it. And so this is an absolutely fantastic teaching tool. And it's worth pointing out too that if you're running any kind of class and you want to involve manuscripts in that class, you can just get in touch with a Bodleian curator and say, hello, I'd like to have a class about social science and looking at examples of artifacts from a certain period or on a certain topic. And we'll be really glad to accommodate that. We see teaching is a really important part of what we do. And the last thing that I have to show you is sort of a medieval reception artifact. This is a copy of Cange's Glossarium, which was given to us by the late Benedicta Ward through her death over the summer. And what you'll see here, this is a sort of a proto-Latin dictionary that was published in 1733. And we spend several £1,000s every year on all of our reference collection that you see in the gallery there. We want to have all the latest books on paleography, on the history of books. So if there's a book that we don't have, please send us an email and tell us about it. And what you'll see so this is a really great early reference book. What you'll see in the frontispiece, if you take a closer look, is a scene of Lady Latin, who has been at the scene of the sack of Rome, and she's sort of passed out on the stairs, and still alive, but holding on, but not doing too well. And the book is called the Glossary of Medieval and Infime Latinitas. So that's sort of the glossary of medieval and debased Latin. And the other thing you might notice in the background, so there's the vandals in the background, they're burning books, and one of them is sticking a spear into an inscription. And what you might notice is that the angle that he's holding up the spear in is the angle that the soldier Longinus is normally shown in pictures of him spearing the side of Christ. And so this is the scale on which Cange and his associates saw the destruction of Latin. So do enjoy these books. Use your library wisely.